Welcome to Foundations of Figma, our most in-depth Figma course for beginners. Today we will learn the basics of prototyping in Figma. After finishing this video, you'll know all the different kinds of prototyping, their practical use cases, and free resources to further upskill yourself. My name is Ansh Mehra and I train businesses on using design and AI. This is lecture 8 from our free 10 lecture series, where you can also win an official Figma Pin. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so let's get started. First of all, before we move ahead, it's extremely important for you to understand that this entire 10 lecture series is not a course on UX design. This is a course where I teach you how to learn Figma. In any subject, there is a tool and the subject. In the field of product design, the most popular tool is Figma, and this course is to teach you the tool. But just learning Figma or knowing the tools will not help you get a good job. So we've already created multiple different videos on the subject of UX design that is freely available on learnuiux.in. So once you have finished learning the tool, which is Figma, you have to make sure that you spend some time learning UX design, which is the subject, and all of it is freely available on learnuiux.in. Now, this entire course had 10 lectures and we are currently on lecture number 8. Before this session, we have covered frames, auto layout, styles, components, variants, variables, introduction to design systems, even design handoff. So a lot of the syllabus has already been completed. If you're here for the first time, I would recommend you to first finish all of the videos that have come before this lecture, because when I teach you lecture number 8, I will assume that you've completed everything that I've taught you so far. On the right side is the preview of our website for learnuiux.in in case you're already done with learning Figma and you want to take things to the next level. Now, a very brief request is that folks, we have been uploading videos for the past 6 months. And a lot of students finished episode number 1, but then the views really dropped, which means a lot of you are not completing your syllabus. So this is just a humble reminder that if only 19,000 people have covered the syllabus, it is very, very important that all of these people that were at 300k, all of these 250k plus people need to finish their syllabus. Now, today's entire lecture is split into 3 modules. In module number 1, I will teach you what exactly is prototyping and how is it different from design, and why exactly do companies need it and how do you start with it. In module number 2, I will actually dig deep into showing you how prototypes work, how exactly do you trigger specific features, and what are the different kinds of animations that you can have. And in the last module, I will share you some very practical resources, free resources that you can use to upskill yourself, along with some very important homework that you need to do. Now, throughout this session, you will see all the keys I click on the top right corner. So at any point, there will be no confusion. And this entire presentation is freely available for you to download on Figma Community. I will be uploading a link in the description, but it's always recommended to use this on Figma, because the fun part is that, do you see this design panel right here? I can go from design to prototype by clicking on this panel, or use the shortcut Shift E to switch between design and prototype. Now, if I zoom out and go here, you'd see this play icon right here. This is me entering my prototype, and I will explain you how did I even create all of this. But I wanted to make sure that if we are doing a session on prototype, then instead of using static slides, instead of following the entire mechanism that we followed so far, let us create a prototype out of this entire presentation. So what you see right now is an inline prototyping window. As you can see, I have not exited Figma. There's a window that has opened up. And as I move my keys, I'm basically able to move through all of my slides. So prototyping is not just for your UI or UX stuff, but you can also use it to create really cool presentations. So let's start with module number 1. What exactly is prototyping and why do we even need to learn it? So can you see this right side menu bar? By default, if you just know UI design, you would have this as a static image. But when you develop these things, you need to make sure that all of these individual hover states are taken care of. And instead of just showing images to your developers or to your stakeholders, you can actually show them how this entire component would look like. So you're essentially adding life to whatever it is that you have been designing so far. And this could be for a landing page, it could be for a website, it could be for an animation. You can use this feature for a lot of things. This specific lecture is only going to focus on creating things for products and UI. Now, there are 5 important things to know here. Number 1 is when you create static UI, it is very easy for the designer to miss out on important edge cases. If I am creating this entire left sidebar menu, it is very easy for me to even realize the fact that there needs to be a hover state. There needs to be a state when I click on it. There has to be a hover state for the selected state. So can you see how my hover on the selected state also adds a subtle darker shade to the fill? Now, all of these things are extremely important, and this is a prototype. And your static design right here, if I were to minimize this entire thing, your static image right here is your user interface. But when you are designing, you need to make sure that your developers and your product managers are fully aware of everything that is required to ship the product. Use case number 2 is that if you're trying to sell your product to a potential customer, and if you haven't developed that product yet, you can use a prototype to explain your ideas to different people. Prototyping is extremely cheap. Developing and then learning from your mistakes takes a lot of time and a lot of money. So as a non-technical person, or as a person who doesn't have the budget to build something, you can create a prototype of your idea, which could be an app or a website, and show it to your potential customers and get their feedback and improvise on the prototype itself rather than improvising on the final product. On number 3, it is extremely seamless to have discussions over prototypes as compared to having discussions over static UI. Because as a designer, you have a map in your brain. You can visualize how things are working out. But when you're having a conversation with your product managers or with your developers, it is so important for them to work on a prototype as an example or as a reference, because there are so many things that you feel are easily assumable. There are too many things that you feel are very obvious, but to an outsider, those small things might not be obvious. So when you put everything into a high fidelity prototype, conversations automatically become way more easier. When I say the word high fidelity, I basically mean something which is absolutely covering all the edge cases. So when you're hovering, when you're clicking, when you're scrolling, it doesn't feel like a fake prototype. It almost feels super real. And selling to non-technical stakeholders also become really simple. So if you're working with your marketing team, just explaining them your idea is really easy. By the way, I'm currently in the process of building my own first tech product, and it's called Product Vision. And because I did not have any in-house developers, I created a very high fidelity prototype. And that is the prototype that I have been sending to all of my potential customers and to a lot of VCs. So it's a great hack for entrepreneurs to actually get validation on their idea. Now the question is, how does this even work? And by the way, I have exited the prototyping mode. I will enter it again, but I just want to explain you how this thing works. Assume that you have 2 states of your user interface. This could be a button, this could be a screen. Basically, you go from state A to state B. For example, if I have this red dot right here, I want this red dot to become purple. To go from state A to state B, you essentially tell Figma that there is a trigger. If that trigger happens, only then you allow state A to become state B. So this entire prototyping fundamental is moving around the concept of a state and a trigger. Now this trigger can be of multiple types. I can move from state A to state B either on a click or drag or hovering or pressing or even pressing a specific key on my keypad. Now in this example right here, when I was going through this, let me just click on this play button right here. So I'll start from that exact point. In this case, can you see this calendar thing? It is moving from a gray colored icon to a black colored icon. So my gray color was state A and my black was state B. Now, how was it going from state A to state B? When I'm hovering on top of it. Now, if I want this thing to go from maybe unselected to selected, that is again a transition from state A to state B, where state A is just like a black text, but when I click on it, this thing becomes blue and this thing becomes black, and then there's a fill around it as well. So here my trigger was on click. Earlier my trigger was hover. So you can have multiple triggers for this. Now the interesting part here is that you can have multiple triggers for state A. For example, if I hover over state A, it will convert into purple. But if I click on it, it'll become white. So one state can actually diverge into multiple states depending on the trigger. So you have different triggers for a specific state. However, one trigger will only lead to one state. So it's never going to happen where state A on hover is sometimes becoming purple and sometimes it's becoming white. That never happens. So you can have multiple triggers branching from state A, but one trigger will only lead to one destination. Now, before I move ahead, please make sure, folks, that you put your feedback into the comment section, and our target is to hit 2000 likes on this video within 7 days of upload. We're also giving away an official Figma pin. So as you're documenting all of your learnings, if you put your learnings on social media or in the comments below and tag me and Figma on your social media, and after 15 days of this video's upload date, we will be shortlisting top 10 students and we will be sending them the Figma pins. Now, the question is, how do you create these triggers and how do you create these states? This entire process of prototyping has 4 components. You have a hotspot, then the trigger, then the destination, which is actually your next state, and then noodles. And before I show you how this works, let me close this and let's just recreate the example that we just had before. So I'll take this group right here, and my first step would be to put this into a frame. Prototyping only works on frames and does not work on groups that are outside of frames. So I'll take this thing right here, go to Shift E and make this say blue. Now I'll take this frame and go Shift E again so that I enter prototyping mode, and you'll notice that there's a small little dot. So this is called a hotspot. I will drag my cursor, take this line and select my next frame. As soon as I do that, I get this very small window, and I will break this down window one by one. But for now, I will simply let it be on its default choice, which is on click. So this is my trigger. This is my state A, this is my state B, and this on the very top is my trigger. Now if I close this, you'd notice that I have this small anchor here which says flow 1. On the right side, you have this thing called flow starting point. And if I double click on it, I can rename this flow. So I will simply call it as example. Then I can click on the play button and it will open up this inline prototyping view. If I click on this ellipse, it'll convert into purple. Now if I click on it again, nothing happens. So what I can do is I can take this state and then hover over this icon right here and drag it to my previous state and again make it on click. Now when I click on the play icon again, if I click once, it goes to purple. If I click again, it goes back to its original color. Now, why did I explain you this? Because this is the most easiest way to create a prototype. Hotspot was that area from where the trigger is linked. The trigger itself is the interaction user will do. Destination is where you will eventually go to. And those lines that you saw, these thin blue lines, these are called noodles. So you click on the plus sign to create that connection. Now my last point says that if there are no existing connections, Figma will make the first frame the starting point. The thing is, in every prototype, there has to be a flow starting point. For example, this is my entire flow. If I don't specify my starting point, then Figma will automatically pick the first slide on the most left edge on the very top and choose that as the starting point. This is not extremely important, but I'm just letting you know that this is how it happens. Now let's just say I want to start my prototype from this specific frame. All I need to do is click on plus, and then I can call this as midpoint. Now if I click on play, my prototype will start from here. So you can have multiple starting points in a specific prototype. It's not necessary that if you have a one single flow of multiple frames, you can only have one starting point. I can have mid starting points as well. Now before we move into the details, let's understand the side panel of the prototyping feature. See, there are 3 main components that we need to understand. Number 1 is the device. Basically, if you see this prototyping window right now, this is just my frame. But if needed, I can actually put a device frame on top of my prototype, which would make it more real. So you can choose whether it's an iPhone or a MacBook. Then you can also select between background colors. By default, it is recommended to let this be black. And then you have all the different flows in your prototype. So as I told you, in your entire left to right flow, you can have multiple flow points. It just lists out every single checkpoint. So if I were to close this and go out, you'd realize that my device is none, my background is black, and then I have all of these mid flows. Now let's just say instead of none, I ended up choosing, say, MacBook Pro 16-inch, and then I click on play. The inline window opens up, but I cannot see my gadget. That is because you cannot see the device in your inline prototyping view. So if I click on this icon right here, it would basically open my prototype into presentation view. So I have to click twice. For some reason, it doesn't work on the first click. Here in my presentation view, I can basically see my slides inside a MacBook Pro mockup. But now because my frame size is not really accurate to a MacBook Pro size, things are sort of moving around. And I can close this, and what I can do is I can enter a full screen mode and I can just switch between slides. But because my frame size is not accurate to the MacBook Pro, it's looking slightly weird. So I can close my presentation view and come back to this specific presentation. And then I can go here and I'm just pressing my right side arrow. So just to like sort of take you through the entire thing again. Background, it is always better to let it be black, and then we have the flow points. Now, in a specific prototype, I told you that there is a trigger, but apart from trigger, there is a lot more that you can fine tune. For example, if you're going from this large petal to a small petal, this is the window that opens up. And I will take you through this window one by one, but let me just tell you all the 7 important components that we have to study here. Number 1 is going to be your trigger, which basically is the kind of interaction that the user will have. Then we have the action. So it's not necessary that when you click, it can just go from state A to state B. Figma allows you to do a lot of more customizations, which could be about changing a specific variable or swapping a specific component. So it's not just hopping from frame A to frame B. There's a lot more that you can do, which is called an action. Then you have your destination, which is your state B. So as I told you, you move from A to B. This is where you decide what is your final destination. Then we have our animation type, because there can be multiple ways you can go from state A to state B. It could be a dissolve animation, it could be a linear animation, and I will explain you all of these different kinds of animations, but don't worry, each and every component will be explained in detail. Then we have easing, which is the speed and the style in which it is animating. It could be a direct cut, it could be an eased in animation. Then you have the duration. Is it a 300 millisecond long animation? Is it a 10-second long animation? And then we have this thing called as reset scroll position, which basically allows you to reset the entire scrolling anytime you restart the prototyping. Otherwise, if you're making a prototype of a vertically scrollable website, if you scroll it and close the prototype and start it again, it would just stay there. So it is better to check this if you want the scroll position to reset anytime you use this. So it's very, very important that we first understand this entire menu. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and go to our original example. And I will click on this noodle right here. And I'll show you all the different kinds of triggers. So we have on click and we have on drag, hovering, pressing, and gamepad. Let this be on click for now. Then we have navigate to, which is the entire action. Now this can be a none action, which will not make sense for us. Navigate to basically means go from state A to state B, and back means go to the previous state. Now there is a lot more inside the action list, which is about setting variables or writing conditions. This comes under advanced prototyping, and I will not cover that in this episode. And I know a lot of you who are already well versed with prototyping would be feeling bored by now. If you feel that it is getting slightly mundane, you can directly go to chapter number 2, because I'm going to start teaching in a very slow way so that every single person understands what's happening. So these things, this is something that we will cover in an additional prototyping course. We will be having a course which is going to be on advanced prototyping. But for now, we will only stick to this one specific action, which means that this entire course is only going to dig deep into the navigate to action and none of these other available actions. Now, we have this frame 1030, which is actually the state. So just to make learning easy, I will call this as state A and this as state B. So now when I open the menu again, I know that my destination is state B. This is my animation type. Now let me just show you all the different examples. Let me click on play. And what I will do is I will just stretch this a bit and drag it. For some reason, it's not fitting to the square. Sometimes these bugs happen. Now, because my entire style is instant, as soon as I click on it, it just changes its color. Okay. Now, did you notice how the entire screen shifted to that specific part? It's probably because I have selected follow active frame. So I can just deselect that. It will not follow. And if I go from instant to dissolve, now if I restart the animation, you'd realize that it is fading into that purple icon. Now to make this more seamless, let's just open it in a new tab so that it's easier for us to understand what's happening, because that entire glitch is very distracting. And here what I can do is I can just get rid of the mockup. So if I go here and choose none and go here and press R, it will just restart the prototype. So I will click and it would go into dissolve. Now I can take the reversal animation, go again from instant to dissolve, click on cross, so that anytime I click, it's just fading in. Now I can select the noodle again And after dissolve, I can choose the category of animation, the type of easing that I want. And we will cover this in module 2, but I'm just letting you know that ease out is the simplest choice. So if you're ever confused, just choose ease out. And then in my duration, I can basically make this as 800 milliseconds. I can take this one, the return one, and make it 800 milliseconds as well. And you can see a preview here as well. And once I go here and press R, now if I click on plus, it will take exactly 800 milliseconds. Now, the interesting part here is that instead of dissolve, I can choose smart animate as well. And what smart animate does is that it would actually create this smooth animation where it will go from state A to state B as if it is just growing and shrinking on its own. So if I press R again, you'd notice that it is animating from state A to state B. Earlier, it was showing in an instant or in a dissolve sort of a thing. So by the way, the return animation is still dissolve. But in my state A to state B transition, it is a smart animate. So it is automatically moving all the pixels into that direction. Now, if I go to this return noodle again and select smart animate for the return, you'll realize that if I press R, this entire thing is animating like a pulse, which is very, very cool. I have recorded this segment after I finished my video because I realized that I had skipped something very important when it comes to understanding smart animate. So let's just say I'm moving from this state to this state and I choose smart animate and this thing is animating into a bigger curve, right? So when I go here, if I were to select my example, there is a reason why this thing is animating. The only reason why Figma knows that this object and this object is connected is because of similar layer naming. So just as a quick example, this is my group 1. This is again my group 1. This is big, this is big, this is big, this is big as well. Now, if I were to rename this as big 2 and this also as big 2, let's see what happens now. I'll press R. Can you see what's happening? Can you see that dissonance? This dissonance is happening because for Figma is very confused that I could see big here, but it does not exist here. So how can I tween it? How can I motion tween it? This entire process of connecting state A and state B layers, it's called motion tweening. But if the naming is correct, if this is big and this is big as well, we will eventually connect both of these states and then Figma will know that, okay, this is the object. So smart animate only works when the layer naming is accurate. Without the right layer naming, if your layer naming is off from state A to state B, it will not work. So let's go back to our slides. Let's break this down one by one. So I'll show you what are the different kinds of animations. And by the way, this is how the prototype of this entire slide was working in case you are just curious in general. So what I'm going to do is we're going to move to module number 2 and I'm going to open the prototype for this. And let's scale this here. And I'm going to explain you all the different kinds of triggers. So we'll first cover what are these on click, on drag and while hovering. And then one by one, we'll understand different kinds of easing. So we have 6 types of triggers and I'll explain you one by one how do they work and what is their use case. The easiest one is on click, which basically means that you can click on a button and the use case is that maybe you click on something specific and it moves to the next frame. So this is again very straightforward. Then we have on drag, which basically means that you can vertically drag something, you can horizontally drag something in a specific direction. So if you're making an accordion or if you're making a list, then you can make sure that that list will move only when your user is dragging. And let me just bring this window in the middle so that my face is not hiding. So while hovering is again very simple. Sometimes you just have this list that you want to, just be more highlighted, the example that I showed you before. So this use case is very straightforward. Then we have while pressing. The use case for this can be prototyping the iOS app delete feature. So if you are sort of clicking on a specific app and holding it, if you're holding your cursor, it would switch to a new state. And then you have key and gamepad, where you can literally say that if somebody hits the space bar, do this. So the use case can be that if you're making this kind of a game, that entire Chrome dinosaur game, anytime you press the space bar, the dinosaur can basically jump. So you can make all of these interesting games using Figma prototype as well. And then you have after delay, which does not require any physical input from the user. It's just that it would automatically wait for a specific time period and trigger the animation on its own. Which basically means that if you're prototyping a chat application, you want to show your customer how the chat works, you can basically have an after delay animation where you put in a message and you say that after 300 milliseconds, send the exact message to make it more real. So that is a good example for an after delay trigger. Now for every single trigger, I showed you that there are different kinds of animations. Like just to quickly have a reminder, if I were to go here and let's just go back to our example. Let me bring that example right in the front. So I'll Command X this and put it here so that we don't spend much time. And if I play this again, let's play this in a different tab altogether. Here you go. So did you notice what just happened? I have a lot of flows available here, right? And this is my example flow. This is my midpoint flow. This is what I wanted to show you. So I told you that this is a smart animate animation. Now, if I go here, select this noodle, instead of ease out, I can actually choose something like bouncy. And let me show you what difference that makes. So if I press R again and click on this again, you'd notice that it has like this very strong jittery effect. If I click on this again, it goes back into a very smart, smooth, linear animation. Now, what I want us to do now, I basically want us to switch between these slides and our animation. So what I will do is I can take this point and just drag it to this frame right here. So now when I go to easing and press R, it just starts from this slide. I can move on to a full screen mode, get rid of this and have it completely edge to edge, which is very, very cool. And by the way, all of these are on after delay. So that is why they're all moving on their own. They are not waiting for my trigger. This exact slide is an example of the after delay feature. And folks, I know that just understanding this and learning this for the very first time is complicated. This is literally the last episode of the entire series. And in my personal opinion, this is going to be one of the most complicated episodes. That's why I'm taking so much of time explaining every single thing so slowly, because it's just a very complicated concept if you're starting this for the very first time. But if you watch this video 2-3 times, if you actually duplicate this exact Figma file and just play around with the settings, you will eventually understand. So as I told you that once you have decided your trigger, you can select different kinds of animations. And once you've selected different kinds of animations, you can basically select different kinds of easings. So we first chose our trigger. I'll go back here. And then you can choose different kinds of easings, because it can either be a linear flow, just like this. It can be something which is very quick. It can be bouncy. It could be slow. It could be easing out and back. And we'll understand why are these even different, because a lot of these look similar. The only reason why I've put them in front of you is so that you can instantly see the small nuance, the small difference in how all of these easing works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back here and let's just run all of these examples one by one. So first, I'll just go to this one, press R, bring back my menu and choose example number 1. I'll take this noodle. So I'm going to keep the trigger as on click. And in my action, I'm just going to go from instant to dissolve. So as soon as I select dissolve, you'd realize that there are new properties that are opening in. There is no sub property in instant because it just appears. If I select dissolve, let's go from ease in to say ease out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here and show you this. So nothing really happened, right? Now, if I go from dissolve to say move in, you notice that there are now multiple new options that have come. Basically, move in allows you to take your state B and just slide like this. So it creates like an overlay. Now, to make this more apparent, let's change the background of this to something which is very, very stark. So let's just take something which is probably like this. Okay, I'll go here, press R, and once I click on this, you would realize that the next state is moving in. So now it's almost like a slide, which is really, really helpful when you're creating decks. Another thing that you can do, I'll go to Shift E, and then instead of move in, I can also do move out. When I select move out, my original slide basically moves out and you sort of see what is behind my state A. So it's almost like state B already existed, but it was hidden. And you can make this into different directions. So if I select up, you would basically have your original slide just move into a different direction. So can you see what's happening? I can basically loop this again and again. Do you know what I'm doing? I'm just like pressing my arrows. So it's very cool how all of these different things can move up, down, left, right if you select the move out and move in feature. There's one more thing called animate matching layers, which basically means that if there's any layer which has the same name, for example, I'll make this box right here. Okay. And I'm going to call this thing as a box. Very straightforward. And I'm going to take this box and probably shrink it like this. Okay. Now this is also called box. This is also called a box. Once I go here and press R, you'd realize that nothing has happened. But once I reverse the animation, you'd realize that the box is actually moving. Can you see what's happening? Let me show you again. I'll go here, select this entire thing. And if I select animate matching layers for the state A to state B, when I was going back, I had already selected Smart Animate, so it was moving. Once I go here and press restart again, do you notice what's happening? That box is essentially acting like Smart Animate. So when I'm going from state A to state B in this specific noodle, I selected Animate Matching Layers. There was no matching layer. When it says matching layers, it basically means the exact naming. So nothing had a similar name apart from this box. So what I've created now, I've created a fusion between Move In and Smart Animate. So you can have both of these combined together. You don't need to just have Smart Animate. So I can delete this box. I can delete this box as well. And now let me show you push. So when you have push, let's just keep this left to right. Push is very similar to Move In, but the only difference here is that, and actually let me just make this one as push as well, and let's make this push to the right. So when I'm going from A to B, it is pushing in. I'm going to unselect this and it's pushing to the left. So this is the preview. When I'm going back from B to A, it is pushing but in the opposite direction. So now it's pushing to the right. What that does is that once I click here, can you notice what's happening? It's like a different slide altogether. It's pushing, it's not moving. Earlier it was sliding on top of each other. Now the last category here is called slide in and slide out. Now this is also very, very cool. I'll make one animation as slide in and the other as slide out. And let's just make this as 300 milliseconds because that's a good animation duration. More than 300 milliseconds just feels very slow. Now notice what's happening. Actually, noticing this in 300 milliseconds is pretty tough. So what I can do is I can basically make this as 1 second. Okay, I'll take this and make this 1 second as well. Now, can you see what's happening? There is a subtle shadow and there's a very subtle fade effect that we can add. So this is slide in and slide out. Now, when we are having all of these actions, you would notice that there's one more category, which is the ease, the easing in and the easing out. Now here, I have multiple options to choose from. Now let me just explain you these options from a theoretical standpoint, and then one by one we'll understand how these work. So I'll just take my trigger point and I somehow lost that trigger point. So let me just start from this one. I'll call this as Bezier 2. That's the wrong spelling, but you get the point. So before I explain you what are these easing presets, I first want to explain you the concept of a Bezier curve. And this entire concept comes from mathematics, where they basically have this combination of time and position. So on the very right side, and by the way, if you're not a mathematical student, don't worry, it is not that complicated. Like, things are very straightforward here. You don't have to get into the depths of how the math works. You just need to know what to click and what to choose. So a Bezier curve is a curve used in computer graphics and related fields. I have not written this definition, but the point here is that it is just a very easy way to understand how a position of something is changing with time. And in Figma, there are 7 curves that you can use, but most designers only use 2. So I'll tell you which ones are those. On the right side, can you see this ball moving? Basically, they have added a smart animate to this. That is why it's not dissolving. That is why it's not going into an instant. Right now, there's a time axis and then there's a position axis. Now, I will not get into the depths of why this is called ease in and ease out, but in your eyes, can you see how the animation is very smooth? It's because of this curve right here. Because in reality, a linear animation looks like this. So when the position is linearly changing with passing time, this is the kind of result that you would get. And by default, Figma has this as the default option. Now, no object in nature ever moves at a constant speed. So linear curves in your prototype will always look very unnatural or robotic. On the other hand, the most popular one is ease in or ease out. Do you see this curve right here? Anytime you see this curve, it basically means that you are easing in something. We are eventually going to launch motion graphics course on After Effects, and there also we'll get into the depths of why this curve is moving in this specific way. So if I go to Figma and let's just say I go back to this specific animation, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this thing and go here. Instead of slide in, I'm going to make the smart animate, and the return will also be smart animate. And here, if I go and maybe choose say gentle, you'd realize that it has a very smooth and gentle push. Okay. And I'll take the return one and also make it as a gentle curve. Now, if I go to my example and click, can you see how smooth it looks? How seamless and how beautiful it feels. Now, if I go here and select ease out and choose this one and just smart animate and ease out again, let's see the difference. Can you see what's happening? So it sort of goes in a straight direction and then subtly it sort of smoothens out. Now, I recommend every young designer to just use gentle. I think it's like the easiest bet to take. But eventually you can study how individual interactions require a very specific category of animation. And we will cover that once we enter like really complicated prototyping. Because I keep reminding folks that this course is not like a UX course, right? So I'm just trying to make you understand what all is possible in Figma. Once we have covered the features, then we will eventually get into the concept of understanding how all of these use cases work. When we have ease out is literally the opposite of ease in, where the animation starts very fast, but it slows down as it reaches the end of the duration. So what happens is, if you're bringing something into the view, always use ease out. When you are taking something out of the view, you should use ease in. Because when you use ease in, the animation starts slowly and it accelerates as it is going towards the end of the duration. So can you see here? The time is moving, but the position graph is at the very low end. But as time passes, suddenly the position shoots up. So this is really, really good when you're moving objects out of your view. But one downside of ease in is that it just feels very sluggish because it starts very slowly. Most people stick with ease out, where it starts with like a very fast jitter. So as you can see, the time is really, really low, but the position change is really high. And then as time goes by, the position curve is sort of slowing down. Then you have ease in and ease out. This is the safest option. So gentle ease in and out, safest option, because it starts sort of very slowly, then it accelerates in the middle and then slows again at the very end. So this is really, really cool when you have like a nice pop-up. The only downside is that if you start using it too much, it sort of feels very unnatural and very too perfect, to be honest. So it doesn't look very real. Then we have ease in back, which I have barely never used. I've never used this. There's also ease out back. So the thing in ease in back and ease out back is that the value goes beyond what was the restricted value. So the math here is this: as time is at 0, it would actually go beyond the position it was meant for. So it actually goes past the keyframes value and it sort of accelerates at the very end. I have personally never used these two, so I will not get into the depths of it because I don't want to unnecessarily confuse you. We also have ease in and out back, where it sort of goes beyond the boundaries at the starting and at the end as well. Again, I've never used this. I would not want to confuse you. So let's just revise what we've learned so far. We understood that you go from state A to state B. For every state A to state B, you have to create a connection. Then we figure out what are the different kinds of triggers. And then we figure out that after you choose a trigger, there's a specific action, right? So right now, the entire course just had one trigger, which was on click. After on click, we decided whether it's, moving in, or whether it's smart animate, or it's a trigger. And then after that, we understood the types of easing in. And some people call this as types of animations as well. Now, I know that this is a lot to digest and you will need to learn this through examples. So I will show you some examples right now. We will create a very brief prototype right now just to show you how it works. And it's important for you to just start practicing these things one by one. So create very simple shapes, go from state A to state B, and just try all of these actions one by one. So I'm going to cover some common triggers and some common use cases. But overall, I will keep sharing multiple articles. I do that very regularly on our Instagram broadcast community as well. So if you haven't joined our Instagram community, it's completely free and I keep sharing a lot of resources. If you scan this QR code, you will have access to it. So before we go to module number 3, I just want to quickly run with a quick experiment. And I just want to show you how to recreate this specific example right here. Okay, so what if I want to recreate this thing right here? Okay, let's start this from scratch. All right, so I took a bit of break because my throat was hurting. Now I'm back recording. So I wanted to show you how I have created this specific thing right here. So just to show you again, I'm going to keep this menu right here and put a flow point. Let's just go and call this as experiment 1. I'll go here and let me show you. So this is how it works. We are basically going to create this menu right here that has a hover state and a selected state. And right now what I've shown you is how you can create prototyping links between one frame to another frame. But in practical projects, you don't create prototypes on frames. You actually create prototypes in the component declaration itself. So this is where you take the concept of components and variants and prototyping all together. Now I want to start from scratch. So let's make the tabs first. Okay. And I'm not going to say much because you already know what I'm doing right now. So I'll just create a text. I'll do Shift I. I already have a box icon library enabled in this. So I'm just going to take some icons, and my step number 1 would be to create the individual tab element. So I'm just going to take this thing, drag it here. Let's just make this size slightly bigger so it's aligned, and let me make this white. The correct way to do this would be to select all of these things, choose a style, take both of these things together and call this as tab. Now I can put a fill to it and probably choose gray 1, and my internal stuff can be gray 3. I'm going to take this, hold command, add some padding. Because there is internal padding in the text, the horizontal padding needs to be slightly more. Let's add a border radius. So this becomes my core tab. Now I'll take home, and first of all, I'll convert this into a component. I'll take this thing right here, add a property to it, which would be my text. I'll take this one and add another component property, which would be my icon. So what that does is I can now change the text and swap the icon into anything that I want. Now I'll take this entire thing, make a copy of it, detach it, make another component out of it, and make the hover state. So the hover state would be, I'll take this thing from gray 1, maybe it can go to gray 2, and they all can simply become black. Now these are two different components, so let us just combine them as variants. And now I'll take this, Shift E, take the hotspot, drag the noodle to state 1 to state 2, and I want the trigger to be hover. So it's going from hover from this state to this state. Now just to make design easy, I'll go into my properties, and in my variants, I'll call this as hover. And this would be hover off, this would be hover on. If you don't know how variants work, how components work, please make sure you finish the rest of the videos. It will make sense to you. Now to test this, I'll make a new frame and I'll take a copy and put it here. Okay. And let's just say, call this trial. Let's add a flow starting point. I'll go here, and it's not renamed, but yeah, I think you get the point. So can you see what's happening right now? It's a dissolve animation. So if I go here and click on the noodle, you'd realize that it's a smart animate. It doesn't matter if it was dissolve or smart animate, it doesn't matter. And I'll just make this at 150 milliseconds because the Doherty's threshold says that it should be 300, but I think now 150 makes more sense. Now, if I hover on top of it, it automatically switches the state. If I remove the hover, it sort of goes back to the previous state. So state P is visible only when I'm hovering, and this is what I actually want. Now I want another state where if I click on it, it sort of becomes selected, right? Which means that there are two grids that are possible. Basically a 2-column structure. There can be unselected, unhovered, unselected and hovered, and similarly there will be selected, unhovered, and then selected, hovered. Let me just explain it to you. Okay, here I will say hover, or let's just make this part as selected, and this thing right here is for my hover. So I'll take this, rotate it so it's very clear as to what are we even selecting, and selected, and let's just call this as unselected, selected, and you have hover. So if it is selected, I basically want the icon to be colored. So let's just take a bright blue color, and this thing can be black, and this thing can probably be gray 2, right? Or I think it can be just gray 1. And then I can take this entire thing, copy the style and just paste it here. Copy the style, paste it here. And on hover, I can basically just increase the shade like this. Now in my variant properties, I have just one single hover property. So I'll just create one more variant and I'll call this as selected. So these are hover off, these are hover on, this is selected off, and this is selected on. Now, instead of prototyping here, I'm going to put all of my prototyping branches in the variant declaration itself. So I'm going to take this, go to Shift E. While hovering, it is at this point. But once I click on it, it will not go to this point. It will actually go to this point. Because if you are hovering and clicking, the next state is not going to be selected unhovered. It is going to be selected and hovered. So I'm going to select this one, on click, hovered and selected, dissolve 150 milliseconds. Now, as soon as my cursor is inside, I basically want this to return to this state when my mouse exits. So I'll delete this interaction right here because I actually do not need it. So I'm just gonna take this interaction and delete it. Take this point, drag it. Instead of on click, I will choose mouse leave. So when I do mouse leave, I can make it dissolve, ease out at 150 milliseconds. And now let's check out the prototype. So I hover, I click, and as soon as I go out, it's sorted. But now something else is also happening. Once I hover again, it is not going back to selected hover. So that deletion that I did was actually important. So I'll go here and create it again. See, this is so important. Like, this is why prototyping is so useful, because you just realize that there are so many things that you miss out when you're designing. Now let's check out. Now this is solid. So you have an unselected thing, you click on it, and boom. Now, if I click on it, I want it to get unselected as well, right? Nothing is happening on the selected state. So I can go here and again go make a branch, on click, return to unselected hovered. So now I've like created a full loop. I can select it, I can unselect it, and it's just sorted. Now, I do not have a mouse leave. So I will again go from unselected hovered to unselected unhovered by selecting mouse leave. So you have mouse leave again. So now this is finally sorted. Now I want a stack of these things, right? So I can just take these, duplicate, and make a copy of 3, put them into an auto layout, and let's just say I go here and I'm just going to choose like a background which is less ugly looking. This is too bad. Let's just take this one, and I'm just going to put 16 or maybe like 5 pixel gap, and then I'm going to put a gray stroke to the entire structure, maybe give an 8 pixel round, maybe have a 10 pixel boundary. And the fun part here is that I can now change the icon very, very seamlessly. So I can call this as trending, and I can take this one and call this as account. Okay. And go back here, press R, and see. Now, very interesting. Are you seeing what's happening right now? Can you see how on hover, the trending word is becoming home? Now, why is that happening? The thing here is that, do you remember when I selected this text right here, I had put a component property? Notice what's happening in all the other cases. This thing has a component property, but these do not have it. So I have to select this and make sure that they are all linked to that same component property. Another thing that we can do is that I can extend the width of all of these things and make it fixed width, so that it doesn't matter where my text goes, the width is always the same. Now, once I go back, see, now the text is okay, but the icons are changing, which means that the icon property is also not attached. So once I go here, you'd realize that, oh, it's not related to the icon property. So now it'll work. So let me just take these and select, let's just take these and make the icon. Now let's check it out again. Yep. Now imagine it took us quite a lot of effort to just make this hamburger menu. It's not even a hamburger menu, it's a sidebar menu. So you can obviously imagine the kind of effort it takes to create a really high fidelity prototype, and that is why you get paid a lot more for this specific skill. And of course, whatever I did right now for every single step, I was sort of explaining you each and everything one by one. But in reality, once you get the hang of it, you do become really, really good. So I'm just gonna show you some important resources and your homework for today, right? It's very, very important that we sort of do this properly. And let's just put full screen mode out there, and let me just put my video here so that you don't get distracted. Let me just put it, like this. So your number one homework is to start reading about prototyping in the first place. The truth is, I have barely scratched the surface right now. This is, by the way, this is not prototyping. I have only taught you Figma. That too, even in Figma, I have barely covered the 60% of the syllabus, because I know that this video is going to go beyond 1 hour and I don't want to overwhelm you. But what you need to do is you need to read more. And the first step is to finish the Figma's documentation. I'm not going to mention that again and again because I've been so repetitive about it. The second thing, once you've finished your Figma documentation, is this Medium article. And I'll put the link in description. It will show you 6 principles for better transition animations. So remember I told you that there is multiple categories of animations, but I never really taught you which animation is suitable for which use case. This article solves that for you, and it gives you very practical examples and references and more articles for further reading. Then we have this very interesting website called designspells.com, which is this large collection of very small micro interactions. And I would recommend you to pick any one of them and just replicate the same using, Figma prototyping. and beautiful examples across different categories. If you really want value from this episode, you should really go to this website and take one simple example and just figure out how to, sort this. Next, we have another inspiration website called motion.zazno.com. I don't think I'm pronouncing it right, but incredible website. It will teach you so much about the principles of motion design. And for every single principle, it will actually give you a lot of implementation examples that will be really helpful. Then there's a person on LinkedIn called Justin Waltz, and he's a senior motion designer at Google. And he regularly talks about interaction design. If you're interested in motion graphics in general, I would strongly recommend you to follow him and read everything he's written. There are two specific examples that I want to show you. So one is an example that he had for iOS and one was on delay. So let me show you the iOS one. So he said a seriously overlooked UX pattern is the overshoot pattern. And overshoot basically means that as you press something, as you move beyond something, the entire interface sort of goes beyond the boundary line. So remember, there was this one graph of ease in and out where I said that the value goes beyond the graph. This is that example. So notice when they are dragging the brightness component, can you see how it stretches? And once they finish it, it sort of bounces, right? Now this is so sweet and so subtle, and it is so satisfying because see how this icon is also extending. Notice how these speaker icons are also sort of moving beyond, and these small things, they really matter. They really add in a lot. Another example was how you can use subtle delays to guide focus of your user. So I'm not going to read the entire thing, but if this is at 1x, this is at 3x, can you see the difference? How things are sort of appearing one by one, and it has a very ease out tone to it. So it's not a linear animation. So are you able to figure out what difference does it make? Like this entire thing is so nuanced and so beautiful in general that in big companies, there are some people who are just interaction designers. Like they do nothing but figure out the interactions, and it's a proper field altogether. And by the way, can you guess which interaction was this? Let me know in the comments. We just learned this. Now, I will not finish this video unless I give you homework. By the way, if you do your homework, there's a higher chance of you winning the Figma Pin as well. What you need to do is you need to create a left sidebar. So right side, just keep it empty, but I've given you the example right here. Imagine that you have a dashboard, okay, and these are your different conversations. And you basically have to create this interactive sidebar where you have hover states ready and a small menu. If you click on it, it should just collapse. So it should come back. If you click on an icon, it should come back. Notion has this interaction. A lot of, I think, photo editing tools also have this interaction where a sidebar can collapse and come back on demand. But I want to make sure that you cover every single state possible, okay? And you post it on social media. When you create that entire project, paste your link in the comment section. I would love to see what you've done so far. If you feel that, oh, Ansh, this is very boring, I'll show you a very cool example that I saw from this student, and he did it really well. In fact, he's also shared the Figma source file as well. So I would like to correct myself. He's not a student. He's a senior product designer, but this is what he created. So this was the prototype that he had.
Spotlight in Figma. Let's get started.
So cool, no? Like it's actually a spotlight and it's sort of moving in delay. So it's super cool. And he's explained the entire process. I would really recommend you folks to try something like this as well. In fact, there is one more person that I really look up to. His name is Vijay Verma, and he used to work at Zomato. And there is so much of cool stuff that this guy creates. I have never spoken to him, but if you were to go and check out his post, there is so much that this guy is doing. And all of his work is available on the community. So strongly recommend that. Now, if you're entering this field for the very first time, and if you're confused about your career in general, because folks, I have completed all the videos so far. So let me just bring my face up here so that you can just, I'll just put myself here so that there's no content getting covered. I have covered everything that you need to know for the basics of Figma. I've given you all the resources. So now moving forward, you have to plan your career and learn the subject. You have to do both of these things in parallel. So this video of ours, step-by-step UX product design roadmap, will help you understand how to approach your career, how to use AI to get feedback, and some top resources and roadmaps to get started. If you are already in the process of writing your case studies for job applications, we've created two very in-depth videos. So it's a series, part 1 and part 2. The ultimate 2024 UX case study guide. And I have listed out all the common mistakes that students make. I have explained what are the different sections you need to have in your case study. And I've also given checklists and proper guidelines that will make sure that you write an amazing case study. If you're here for the first time, please make sure you check out our remaining videos. We've created learnuiux.in. We've created howtoprompt.in that has free AI masterclasses on ChatGPT, Midjourney, Claude. We just created a proper latest prompt engineering course that has all the top-notch advice. It's all available for free. And we also have a 15 episode course which is just about UX design. All of that is documented on learnuiux.in. And folks, I have to be real with you. If you're starting out, it takes at least 6 to 8 months, assuming you spend at least 2 hours every day. 2 hours every day into 8 months will only help you learn the basics, just the basics to a point where you can write your first 3 case studies. It is only after a year of working, maybe as an intern, not an unpaid intern, or as a paid intern. It is only after 12 or 16 months of experience that you actually get good enough. There are very few people who can cover that. So if you're spending 4 to 5 hours every single day, that would still work. But you have to give yourself time. It doesn't happen very fast. By the way, we have also created a lot of cool courses on spatial design and Vision Pro. We have a playlist where I actually redesigned a lot of popular apps as well. Very few people have seen that content. We've also created content on negotiating your salary, communication skills, time management, energy management. There is so much that I've shared already. So if you haven't seen that, do check it out. Just to remind you, we have a competition going on. So if you want to win an official Figma pin, I got these from the Figma San Francisco office myself. If you want that, make sure you document all of your learnings in the comment section. In fact, let me know how this entire course was. It took me almost 2 to 3 weeks to script this course. I had to hire an external prototyper and pay him just to write the script with me because I didn't want to miss out on anything important. So I really want you to comment below. I really want us to hit the comment target. We could not hit our comments target in our previous video, but there were so many students who said that, Ansh, we really want the next episode. We really want the next episode. So I've stopped doing that entire blockage thing where, oh, I will not script it unless you comment. I've realized it will not work out. Why? To punish the sincere students. But I would really appreciate if you were to click on subscribe, put your comment as to how this episode was. Did this help you? You already have the entire Figma community file for free. If you post your learnings on social media, make sure you tag me and Figma. And top 10 students with their best notes in the comment section will win the Figma pin. This is only valid for Indian viewers. And if you do the homework and post the homework link as well, then you get bonus points. But please make sure the competition is valid only till 15 days of the video upload date, so don't delay too much. With that, we have finally finished the core episodes of this entire series. It has been a journey that has lasted for almost 6 to 7 months. This was one of the most difficult and, research heavy projects that I had ever taken up. But I'm pretty sure that if there's any student just like me in his college or her college, and if she cannot afford a really expensive degree or a really expensive cohort, then this course can at least help her get started. But I really hope that you're following the entire syllabus because there is a lot to cover in the first place. And we will be uploading new videos on new subjects apart from UX. We have just launched a free video editing course. Episode 1 is already out, where I really dig deep into the psychology behind editing. I'm not going to teach you just the tools, but also the practical concepts that help you stand out as a video editor. So we have a few topics in mind. Let me know in the comments if you are interested in these things. We are planning a course on video editing. We are planning a course on no-code web development, 3D design using Spline, motion graphics using Lottie files, graphic design in Photoshop and other AI tools. And I'm also planning a series where I'm going to be talking about how to become more confident, how to improve your communication skills, how to become a stronger person in general. Because I felt like more than skills, there were a lot of soft areas where students are still struggling, and I really empathize with them because I also grew up as a very awkward and a very lanky and a very weak kid in general. And I've sort of figured out these small hacks that have really helped me improve my own personality. But without your feedback, it's just very difficult to get like good insights. So if you're not on our broadcast community, do join that because that is where I get most of my feedback. A lot of our discussions happen on the Instagram community. Apart from that, let me know in the comment section, what should we make a video on next? If you haven't subscribed to us already, please do that. that and hit the bell icon so that you never miss an update. With that being said, I hope that you're taking care of your mind and body. This is your dost Ansh Mehra signing out. If you enjoyed this video, then do check out this video of the same series. I am sure that it will help you even more.